And now it gives me very, very great pleasure to welcome Stephen Cottrell to speak to us. He's been a great friend of the festival since the beginning. Stephen's been Bishop of Chelmsford since 2010, and just before Christmas came the glad tidings that he was to be the next Archbishop of York. And I should probably confess at this point that about 30 seconds after I spotted this on Twitter, I messaged Stephen and said, "Marvellous news, congratulations, this is great, and you are still coming to Bloxham, aren't you?" And he very kindly replied, even though you were in the middle of a press conference or it was all happening. Anyway, we are delighted to welcome you here. Thank you. Bishop Stephen is a prolific writer and highly popular speaker. I think the numbers of you here is a testament to that. And today he's going to be talking about his experience as a pilgrim walking to Santiago de Compostela. Bishop Stephen, welcome.
Thank you. Dear sisters and brothers, it's a great joy to be with you. Thank you for giving up an hour to listen to me talking about walking. Let me assure you, it will all be over in slightly under an hour, and then you can go for a walk yourself, which will be much nicer than listening to me. As well as talking about walking, I'm kind of thinking about 3 books which I will commend to you along the way. And as some of you may know, I do lie awake at night worrying about how people live the Christian life without reading my books. Astonishingly, some people seem to manage it, astonishingly. And if you're one of those, you can rectify that later. And the books that all kind of coalesce around a theme of love and walking are Walking the Way of the Cross, where you can do a biblical Stations of the Cross, a walk around your own church. This is a book I wrote with Paula Gooder and Philip North. I Thirst, The Great Triumph of Love, which was the Archbishop of Canterbury's Lent book many moons ago and has just been republished. But particularly, I wanted to talk about this book, which is probably, of all the books I've written, the one that's the most personal and the one that probably most expresses who I am as a disciple of Christ and as a pilgrim, and it's called Striking Out. And I thought perhaps I'd begin by talking about the title, Striking Out. I don't know other writers who you've listened to over these 2 days. By the way, the Bloxham Festival is an absolutely fantastic thing. It's kind of opened a window in the life of the church to help us reflect together on the interrelationship between faith and writing and faith and reading. And I kind of hope also that coming here and listening to people talking about writing might, for many of you, release within you your own inner poet and inner writer so that you can begin to express yourself in words. However, when I wrote this book, as I'll come on to tell you about in a moment, I didn't have a title. And sometimes I find a title comes quickly and sometimes it never seems to come at all. And it was only at the final stage of editing the poems and stories in the book that I decided that one line in one of the poems just wasn't working, so I striked it out. And as I striked it out, another line came to me, which was, "Some things are only learned by striking out." And I suddenly realized that was what the whole book was about. But it took me to the very final moment of the final edit before you have to commit it to the publisher to realize that was what the book was about. It was about striking out. And it was about striking out in all 3 meanings of that phrase. So on one happy day 3 years ago, I said goodbye to Rebecca. I said Mass in my little chapel in Bishop's Court. I'm currently the Bishop of Chelmsford. I walked to Ingatestone Station, which is about 2.5, maybe 3 miles from where I live. I caught the train to Plymouth. I got the overnight ferry to Santander. I've already abandoned my carefully produced PowerPoint presentation. I am to PowerPoint what King Herod was to child-minding, and so here's my map. So I got the train to Ingatestone. I walked to Ingatestone, got the train to Plymouth, got the overnight ferry to Santander. Here's a map of northern Spain. There's Santander up here. There's Santiago de Compostela over there. Take my word for it, it's a long way. So it's about 750 kilometres. You need to work out what that is in miles. It must be about 500 miles. And with wrong turnings, I walked a lot more than that. The reason this is called the Camino Del Norte, most people, when they say they've walked the Camino, they're walking the Camino Francais from sort of St. John Pied de Port through they skip the Pico de Europa, whereas for most of my walking, I was in the mountains. And I set myself, as I walked, the happy little task of writing a sonnet every day. And I did it chiefly for my own pleasure and reflection. One of the many reasons I went on this walk was, I was craving solitude. Every 10 years, the Church of England gives clergy a sabbatical. So this was part of my sabbatical leave. I'll walk to Santiago. I've been dreaming about it for many, many years. And I thought if I don't do it now, I'll be too decrepit to ever do it. So I set myself this happy task of reflecting on my walking through writing a sonnet each day. And after all, I was walking for 9 or 10, sometimes 11 or 12 hours a day. There wasn't much else to do. When you're up in the mountains on your own, I thought, and the good thing about a sonnet, I thought to myself, is that a sonnet is the sort of thing you could compose in your head and then write down later in the day, though I have to confess there were many moments where I stopped on the footpath and I'd get out my phone and dictate into my phone the latest thoughts for the latest poems. I never thought for a moment that they would ever be published. I was doing it simply for my own pleasure and as a way of trying to understand and reflect on what I was experiencing on the road. But when I got home, various parishes in the Chelmsford diocese said, Bishop, come and talk to us about walking the Camino. It is, there's been television programmes about it, films made about it. As you will know, many of you perhaps will have walked the Camino yourself. It's a popular thing to do. Though, as I say, most people walk it's a long way whichever way you travel. The relatively easier route, the northern route, is very mountainous. But I thought to myself, I can't get lost. As long as I keep the sea on my right, I'll be okay. So when I got home, parishes invited me to come and speak about the experience of walking the Camino, and I didn't know what to say, which is not something I usually suffer from. And I found myself turning to the poems. So I'd pitch up at a parish to talk about walking the Camino, and I'd say to them, I don't really know what to say. It was this profound experience of great joy and great vulnerability, and the two often go together. But here's one of the poems I wrote. And then, kind clergy would say to me, Bishop, I really like that poem. Could I have a copy? And I think, they're just being nice. I'll let them have a copy. But to cut a long story short, eventually I thought, maybe these poems do say something which is worth sharing. So I wrote the inevitable letter to the publishers saying, I won't be offended if you go and tell me to lie down in a darkened room and stick to the day job, but I've written these poems, and so the book was born. So let me read you one, and then I'll tell you a bit about what I learned on the road, what I learned about love, and then hopefully there'll be a chance for us to have some conversation. So one thing when you walk to Santiago, if you've ever thought about doing it or if you've done it yourself, all the guidebooks and the websites tell you that if you can, try to carry on your back no more than 10 kilograms. They say try to get your rucksack down to 10. It implies by saying try to get it down to 10 kilograms that you probably won't succeed. But try to get it down to 10 or under. When I weighed my rucksack on the day before I left, it came in at 9.5 kilograms, so I was very pleased with myself. I'm travelling light. However, let me tell you, 9.5 kilograms, when you've been walking 15 miles uphill in northern Spain in the heat of the sun, it's heavy. And so I found that I kept on reflecting about weight, the things we carry and the things we put down. And I also found myself reflecting a lot. I mean, I went on this pilgrimage as a retreat, and I wanted the solitude. And so I found myself thinking about Christ, and so the themes of Christ and weight and carrying burdens kept emerging in the poems. So this one is called, I Know a Man Who Carries Heavy Loads. I know a man who carries heavy loads, for whom no weight's too sharp, nor yet too sheer, who does not ask whence such a burden came, or why it has been carried all these years, but does not share it, splitting half with half, or say, you get what you deserve, no less. It is for ones like me still undeserving that he comes to shoulder and to bless. He picks up what you press on him and chides you with a smile if you persist in keeping what you cannot bear. His heart is strong, though not a strength incapable of weeping. Oh, come to him, if broken, burdened, sad, in holding you. This strong man's heart is glad. I actually wrote that poem in the middle of the night. I'm very good at sleeping. It's one of the few things I'm consistently good at in life. And I wrote it in the middle of the night on the Feast of the Holy Cross, the 14th of September. And I'd been thinking about, I got the first line. That's often how poems are born, aren't they? The first line. I know a man who carries heavy loads. But I couldn't really get much further. And then lying awake in the middle of the night in this little hostel, because the great thing about walking to Santiago is it's cheap. Because so many people walk it, every little village has a pilgrim hostel. And you get a sort of, I should have brought it with me to show you, you get a little Pilgrim Passport, which is issued by the Confraternity of St. James, and at each of the hostels you get a stamp to show that you've stayed there and walked that way, and you can stay in the hostels for €5 or €6 a night. So I walked for the best part of a month. If I'd been staying in hotels for the best part of a month, it would have cost a fortune. But I stayed in these little hostels, which are not much more than kind of just imagine a church hall with bunk beds in it. And if you're lucky, there was usually a shower, an A basin, and a toilet. That was about it, but not usually a kitchen. So very, very basic. And so lying awake in the middle of the night on the Feast of the Holy Cross, the rest of the poem got written. So I really should, believe it or not, I did prepare this talk. I know it doesn't seem that way. And I've abandoned my my brilliant plan I had for the talk has been abandoned already. So I just thought about some of the things I learned. So first of all, pilgrimage always begins from where you are. People, when I got home, people kept on saying to me, "Did you walk the whole way?" So I thought it was a very absurd question. Did you walk the whole way? I said, well, yes, of course I did. I started from where I was, and I finished at the end, So, and as you have already guessed, I had this romantic idea. I think every pilgrimage starts from your own front door. So I had this romantic idea. I must start from my own front door. I haven't yet mastered the art of walking on water, hence the ferry to Santander. But it felt really good to walk out of my own front door, even if I only walked, 3 miles in England. And the opening line of the book is this. Just a little plug for the Festival of Pilgrimage in Oxford. I'm speaking at that one, and I'll be saying more about. This talk's more about the poems. I'm coming to the Festival of Pilgrimage, where I'll talk more about pilgrimage itself. But this is the opening line of the book. The book is a book of poems and stories. So it's not just a poetry book. And the first sentence is this: we must be the first generation of Christians who think that pilgrimage is about arriving rather than travelling. If you're a member of a local church, your church might at some point have organised a pilgrimage. What that usually means is we hire a bus. We get on the bus. We go to some holy place, Walsingham or St Albans or Glastonbury or wherever, Canterbury. We have a service. We hit the gift shop. We have a picnic lunch, possibly even song, though we usually bunk off that and go shopping in Canterbury. Then we go home. We've been on pilgrimage. None of our forebears would have understood that as a pilgrimage. A pilgrimage was always about making a journey. And all the important things, read Chaucer, all the important things are the things that you learn on the way. So the first thing that I learned on the way, here's a picture of my rucksack. The first thing that I learned on the way was how to travel light. So for instance, I took with me, in my 9.5 kilograms, I took with me 3 pairs of trousers, 3 shirts, 3 pairs of knickers, 3 pairs of socks. You don't have a pair of knickers, do you? 3 knickers. Anyway, I took with me 3 of everything, and I discovered that you don't need 3. You need 2. Wash one, wear one, wash one, wear one. I don't think there's any dirty laundry on the back of that. You can see my banana. Bananas don't weigh too much, but they're a good source of energy. So I'd always have a banana with me in case I couldn't find anything to eat. But often there'll be socks and knickers hanging off the back drying because I washed them in the basin the night before, ready to change into. I didn't need 3. And it was a sobering and also quite a liberating thing to learn. Just how little you actually need. And I don't know whether you've heard of this, but there's a prayer that years ago I started saying every day. And I do mean every day of my life I started saying this prayer. Some of you may have heard it. Let me just think. It goes, Our Father, who art in heaven. Are you familiar with this prayer? And there's a line in it that says, give us today our daily bread. And I don't think until I walked to Santiago that I'd really understood what that meant. I think what it means is, Lord, give me enough for today and help me to stop craving more. Give me today the bread for today. I don't think I realised what that meant. But one of the great gifts of pilgrimage especially when you go on a long pilgrimage like this, is not only do you have to travel light and you start shedding anything which is superfluous. So for instance, if you want a really good pair of designer labeled jeans or a new frock, the best place to go to get it for free is day one of the Camino. Because all the pilgrims who've taken a nice outfit to change into in the evenings, they dump it at the very first opportunity, because you don't want anything. Weight is everything. You want to get rid of stuff. But also the vulnerability of, I didn't know where I was going to sleep. On day one, I didn't know where I was going to sleep. Now, I couldn't remember if that had ever happened to me before in my life. That I woke up and thought, I don't know where the next meal is coming from, and I don't know where I'm going to sleep tonight. And so the introduction of that vulnerability into life was a very powerful thing. I also learnt that someone had been this way before me. I'm not somebody who was blessed with an inner sat-nav. I don't have a good sense of direction. On day one, I got the ferry to Santander. I walked out of Santander and stayed somewhere on the outskirts of Santander on the first evening. And so the first proper full day's walking, I woke up and it had been blisteringly hot the day before, pouring with rain on that next day. And I put off setting off, hoping the rain would stop. It was obvious it wasn't going to. So I put on all my wet weather gear, set off, and then with horror thought, I don't really know where I'm going. I didn't have any maps with me, which looking back probably was a foolish thing to do. But I'd been told that it was very hard to get lost because the Camino was very well marked. There are these way markers, official ones, and indeed unofficial ones. But I didn't know that when I first stepped out. I thought, I think it's that way, but I'm really not sure. I'd only been going a few hundred yards, and I saw this sign, a yellow arrow pointing the way to Santiago. And all across northern Spain, there are these yellow arrows pointing the way. The next thing I learned is that there is a space between A and B. And here I have to be careful not to speak for ages about this. But the space between A and B. Most of us, most of the time, spend most of our lives trying to get from A to B in the quickest possible time by the shortest possible route. And the great thing about walking, especially walking day after day after day, is you have to go at the pace that you're walking. And so your appreciation of what is in front of you and beside you and around you is massively increased. So let me read you another poem. Between A and B, there is a space. But with eyes on the road and a brisk pace, you'll never see it. It is warm and slow. It finds the contours of the land and goes the same speed as you. If you make your goal the destination, then you'll never know how to travel well. Oh, so much misery is heaped upon the world by those who move quickly and think only of the end. Another way is waiting, and all that it requires is what you've already got: time, candour, and a sturdy pair of shoes. between A and B, there is a space. It is here and now. It is your life if you choose. However, the shadow side of that is I also discovered that it's possible to be driven even while you're walking. I mean, literally, there was one afternoon when a fellow pilgrim you get to know each other because on the road, other pilgrims, although on the Camino Del Norte there aren't that many, sometimes for hours and hours and hours on end, I wouldn't see another human being up in the mountains, but the other pilgrims you did get to know. And one afternoon, a fellow pilgrim of mine came by in a taxi and stopped and said, "Did I want a lift?" I declined. I was tempted, but I declined the offer. But I don't mean literally being driven. It's more that, that tendency to want to get as fast as possible by the shortest route, all that drivenness inside us. I did find that I was becoming, as the days went by, I was becoming slightly obsessed by how many kilometres I'd walked that day, where I was going to get to next. Spending far too much time pondering signs like this. So I've got 320 kilometres to go, 16 kilometres to the next town. It's funny how that happens. But what I also learned was the beautiful hospitality of strangers. So many stories to tell that there isn't time. But one story, at a little place called Penduel on the northern coast, I reckon about halfway through the walk, where I was beginning to have some bad days. I was beginning to get some blisters. It was hot. Fortunately, I didn't get any injuries, but there's all sorts of aches emerging. I stopped at this little hostel, and the man who owned the hostel, I don't speak, I'd learnt a few, I knew how to say beer and breakfast in Spanish, but that was about it. He didn't have any English, but he welcomed me into this little hostel that he ran, and he said to me, could I wash your clothes for you? And so he took my clothes, I went and sort of lay on the bed, and he said, and I'll be cooking supper tonight. And that was the only one of the hostels where somebody prepared a meal. And when I came down to supper, all my clothes had been washed and properly laundered. It was such the most overwhelming act of kindness from a stranger. But also, often by the side of the road, you'd see this. Lovely, these were most beautiful figs. But often by the side of the road, you'd find water left out, fruit, food, bread. And I think I'll shut up in a minute because I'd love to hear your questions. I think this for me was probably the thing I learned more than anything. And I learned it about myself. That I am one of those people who has always craved stillness and solitude. I've always craved that, but I'm not very good at it. So, although I crave to have time in stillness and silence in prayer, when it comes to it, I'm fidgeting. I'm physically fidgeting, and my mind is certainly fidgeting. And I can only be still and silent in that kind of way when I have the anchor of another human being. So if somebody is in the chapel or in the room with me praying, I can be still. But as soon as they leave the room, I, as it were, leave the room as well. It's taken me, a long time to discover that I am one of those people for whom interior stillness is found when I'm moving. And the thing is, I don't think I'm alone. I think it's those people who say, I find it easier to pray walking the dog, often saying it rather apologetically. I think they're onto something. Let me just read you, if I can find them, a couple of quotes. I won't be able to find them. Oh, this is Alice Walker, the writer Alice Walker. Excuse the bad language. Those of a faint disposition leave the room. I think it pisses God off if you walk by the colour purple in a field and don't notice it. And this is the great American essayist Rebecca Solnit. I like walking because it's slow. And I suspect that the mind, like the feet, works at about 3 miles an hour. If this is so, then modern life is moving faster than the speed of thought. And this is Rousseau. I can only meditate when I'm walking. When I stop, I cease to think. My mind only works with my legs. Now, I don't think that's true for everybody, but it is true for me. Perhaps we should now go to very high authority, Winnie the Pooh. This is one of the most unbearably sad passages in the whole of English literature, is at the end of House at Pooh Corner, when Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh go to an enchanted place, and there we say goodbye. And Christopher Robin, if you remember, is explaining to Pooh that he's going to school. Life is changing. And they talk about what they like doing best, of course, which is, what I like doing best, says Christopher Robin, is nothing. How do you do nothing, asks Pooh, after he'd wondered for a long time. And this is profound wisdom. Well, it's when people call out at you just as you're going off to do it. What are you going to do, Christopher Robin? And you say, oh, nothing. And then you go and do it. It means just going along, listening to all the things you can't hear and not bothering. And again, Rebecca Solnit, thinking is generally thought of as doing nothing in a production-orientated culture, and doing nothing is hard to do. It's best done by disguising it as doing something, and the something closest to doing nothing is walking. And a word for the church. This is me and some of my fellow pilgrims in front of the great Basilica at Santiago. You can't choose your fellow travellers. We'll finish with a prophetic word to the church. You can't choose your fellow travellers. Whether we like it or not, we inhabit this world together. And you do learn that on pilgrimage. You do learn that irritating person who's next to you, sleeping in the bunk above you, snoring through the night, they are your fellow traveller, whether you like it or not. So I will finish with I hope you got questions, otherwise we're all going to go home early. Though I could talk for more. I did have a picture. This is my Pilgrim Passport, or part of it. So you get all these stamps, beautiful stamps in the places where you stay. And I called this talk Love One Step at a Time, because the whole experience of walking to Santiago was, for me, an experience of the most profound joy. Sometimes that joy was found through vulnerability, of not knowing where I was going to sleep, not knowing what I was going to eat. Sometimes I went through some dark times on difficult days up in the mountains where I just wanted to stop and didn't think I could carry on. But as I found my life, just for a month, being stripped back to the most basic things about eating and sleeping and walking, what it did inside me was just joyful. I found I had a renewed sense of love for my fellow travellers, this motley band of muddled humanity that I was stumbling along with, the beauty of the world around me, and everything else. And I don't think I was a miserable git before I set off. But I certainly came home with a much greater sense of joy. And just as a footnote, I have got this new job I'm going to later in the year. I'm determined to do it joyfully, to find the joy in the gospel that for me came by rediscovering what it is to be a pilgrim. So I'll finish with this poem, which I think is the most joyful poem in the book. And it's about the upside down wisdom that came to me by being on the road. You know, this was written on one day, high up in the mountains. It was, I think, the highest point in the Pico di Europa. And it was a beautiful sunny day. And I'm in the mountains on my own, and the birds, I did phone my wife, actually. I thought, I've got to phone Rebecca and tell her how much I love her and how wonderful life is. Because it was just one of those moments. And, and I got a good signal as well, It was just one of those moments, and out of that came this slightly absurd poem. It's called I Leapt, I Leapt. I put down the bird that was in my hand and found a flock of swallows in the bush. I purchased a pig from a man with a poke and fashioned 2 silk purses from her ears. I held an acorn tightly and felt the oak. It set my faint heart beating once again. 2 + 2 + 2 doesn't equal 6. Madrid is not the capital of Spain, neither Santiago nor Seville. It set my faint heart breaking once again. The broth was delicious, even though I asked some other cooks to help with the cooking. The rain in Spain falls mainly on the hills. I leapt. For once, I wasn't looking. So, thank you. So I hope I may have awoken in you a desire to walk, possibly even a desire to write poems, and hopefully some questions.
Thank you. The stewards are going to bring round the mics.
Thank you very much indeed. I would like to say there are some big hills in the southern route.
Yeah, there are. The Pyrenees.
But what I was going to say was, how do you take being a pilgrim back into ordinary everyday life?
Well, perhaps when I talk in the festival later in the year, journey and pilgrimage, of course, as a theological motif, it runs right through the Christian faith. And so it occurs to me that one of the things we could usefully do as a church is recover the sense of being a Christian is being a pilgrim. First of all, obviously, the whole journey of life, which is for us, for those of us who are followers of Christ, for us the whole journey of life becomes in Christ a pilgrimage home. And it's good for us to be aware of that. I was a couple of years ago now, I was sitting on the tube in London, couldn't help but overhear a conversation going on next to me, 2 women speaking to each other. One said to the other one, how often do you think about dying? And the other one replied, oh, not very often, just once every 2 or 3 hours. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation. And I thought, well, we are all aware of our mortality. Whether we think about it every 2 or 3 hours, perhaps we do. We're all aware of it. We're also probably in our culture deeply in denial about it. I think the whole opening up life as pilgrimage actually, in a good way, helps us to focus on what life is, where life is going. I certainly believe that if we treated each other as fellow pilgrims, I think the church would be less anxious, more generous, less judgmental, more able to live with ambiguity and difference. But what we prefer to do is put on our blinkers. We want a church which is just for people like us, and we put on our blinkers, or worse than that, actually trying to remove people who don't see it like us. So I'm starting to witter on now, Alan. So for all sorts of reasons, I think, and I hope the Festival of Pilgrimage will bring this out, that general motif that becoming a Christian is like a journey, being a Christian is like a pilgrimage, I think it'd be really good for us to recover that in the way that I think our forebears probably did.
Thank you very much. I was interested in the bubbling up of joy and how one thing is sometimes linked to another, and about the shadow sides and the opposite of joy being sorrows and losses. So I was wondering if that was your experience too.
Yeah, absolutely. And could I read one more poem? Because I tended to read you the slightly. Let me read you one of the darker poems. If I can find one. There were many dark days, but of course there's no point in having. So this is called I Haven't Seen My Shadow for a While, which was because that's the other thing. My main companion was my shadow. So I found myself, as well as thinking a lot about weight, I found myself thinking a lot about shadows. So this is. I haven't seen my shadow for a while. I found out years ago that the best place to hide it was the dark. That is why I'll keep the lights off if you don't mind. My face is in the shadow, surely that's enough. Now why would you ask any more of love? The morning's light, the sun's hot benediction is forcing through the ribbon of the cloud. And my defence is obfuscating fiction. I see clearly what was hitherto ignored behind me as I look towards the light, ahead of me, if darkness still seems right. Clarity is a mixed blessing. The charm of ignorance is still fragmenting calm. So yeah, I without wanting to depress you on a Saturday morning at the beginning of a day, I think it's. I think we let people down in the church if we don't help them confront the darkness. And the way of Christ, the pilgrimage that we walk with Christ, will always lead us to the cross, will always take us into the wilderness. And yes, most certainly, although when I came to the end, for me, it was an experience of profound joy, there were some very, very dark times along the way. And of course, for some of my fellow pilgrims, I met, by the last week, we'd formed a little international dining club of various people that I'd met along the way, and if we found ourselves staying in the same town, we'd arrange to meet up in the evenings. And one of the men was a Colombian fishing magnate, a very wealthy man, devout Roman Catholic, who'd done a deal with God, I think, in his early 20s, that if he was successful, one day he'd walk to Santiago. And here he was, in his 70s, making good on his deal with God. He stayed in fancy hotels every night. But he spoke Spanish, so he was a good person to have with you in a restaurant. And the wine that we drank was of a better quality. But there was a Dutchman, Keys, who was not a Christian, but he was searching for God. And I met him, I think, on week 1 or week 2, and our paths kept crisscrossing. And he was very clear, I'm walking to Santiago to find God. I had dinner with him on the night we arrived in Santiago, and he was in a very dark place because he hadn't found God. And the last conversation I had with him, and I wished I'd had it with him earlier on the road, was to say to him, look, I can't, God is not my possession. I cannot give you God. I said, but maybe the problem is, if you think God is somewhere else, if you think God is in your next step, if you think God is in Santiago, then you will never find God. God is either present in this step you're taking now, in this place, or there is no God. But he somehow had got it into his head that God was to be found somewhere rather than found in here. And it was, he was in a very, very dark place that night.
Bishop, I suspect many of us in this room today have actually been on pilgrimage.
I'm sure, yeah.
One of the things that I learnt was that yes, the simplicity of the way, the joy of getting there, but dealing with coming home was rather different. Would you like to comment on that?
Oh, yes. Perhaps I might read you one more poem at the end about, there's one poem about coming home and how hard it can be. I mean, of course, in ancient days, you would walk to Santiago and then, you'd give St. James a hug, go to Mass, and then you'd turn around and walk back again. Very few people do that nowadays. There's a chap I know in Essex who that's what he's done more than once. He's walked all the way there and he's walked all the way back. And I imagine if you did do it that way, it creates a nice long decompression chamber to bring you back into daily life. Whereas what we tend to do is what I did, is I got on the plane to come home. I don't think I've got any wisdom on this other than to acknowledge that for me, it was a wonderful, refreshing freedom to have this space for a month just to be and to walk. And it was hard to re-engage with a busy life and a busy schedule. I might read that one poem right at the very end, so we'll take a couple more questions.
Two questions. One, a very brief one. Were you one of those pilgrims that got up very early in the morning? And the other was, where do you think this interest in pilgrimage has come from recently?
Yeah. So yes, I was, although I mentioned earlier I'm very good at sleeping, and I'm not somebody who naturally wants to get up early. In fact, I never want to get up. I find it equally hard to get up at 5 in the morning as 10 in the morning. It takes a great act of will, whatever the time is to get out of bed. But actually, in these hostels, for those of you who know them, you're all on top of each other in these bunk beds. Men, women, everybody all together. And once the first person gets up, however courteous they are about trying to get up quietly, once one person gets up, everybody starts getting up. So I was getting up, for me, very early in the morning and setting off early in the morning. I was walking in September, October, and so the days are starting to get noticeably shorter, so I was usually setting off in the dark. But that was a joy, because some of you may see the dawn regularly. I'm not one of those people who gets up early enough to see the dawn, but for a month I saw the dawn nearly every day, and that was fantastic. So yes, I did get up early. Where's the interest in pilgrimage come from? I don't think I know the answer to that question. I do think in the church at the moment we are becoming quite an anxious church. Anxious about our future, anxious about growing, anxious about all sorts of things. And I don't think being anxious is terribly attractive, so it's not going to work, just being more anxious. So there's something very liberating about connecting with other traditions of our faith. And as I said in answer to Alan's question, I think the motif of journey and pilgrimage is deeply embedded in the Christian tradition. And so I think when you recover it, there's a kind of, it's like opening a window.
Thank you. I really enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. I'm going to use your research and perhaps go in September and October, and because it's on our 60 lovely things to do list.
Yeah. It's a good time of the year to go
Yeah.
because the weather's still good, but it's not so
Not so
blisteringly hot.
If my husband had done the Camino by himself, I'd have been quite envious, if not a little mad, and would probably have made him come again and do it with me.
Yeah.
Are you planning to do it a second time?
Oh,
with your
well,
wife?
I've actually already done it a second time. Rebecca's here. Rebecca and I mean, I very much, well, she couldn't get a month off work, so it wasn't really an option. So I could, because it was my sabbatical leave. But was it last year or the year before, we walked what's known as the Camino Inglés. So in medieval times, if you were a pilgrim living in Bloxham or Birmingham or wherever, and going to Santiago, you would start from Bloxham or start from Birmingham, you'd walk to Plymouth or Portsmouth, you'd get the boat to northern Spain, and at that point the main port on the northern coast of Spain was Corunna Ferrol, and that route from Corunna and Ferrol has always been known as the English Camino, because the English pilgrims would have done most of their walking in England, and it's 120 kilometres. So I'd recommend it because it's just as ancient as all the, the map's not there, just as ancient as all the other routes, but it's 120 kilometres, and you can do it in a week quite comfortably if you're reasonably fit. And so we had it was a very different experience doing it with somebody else, but we had great fun. So we did that 2 years ago, whenever it was. Yeah.
Thank you. At the beginning of your talk, you referred to the 3 different ways that you understood striking out.
Ah, yes.
And I wondered if you could say a little bit more about the other ways.
Yeah, well, I don't think I even said what they were, did I? So I'm so badly organised. That wasn't in my notes. Yeah, striking out. Yes, of course. Yeah, we never got any further, did we? Thank you. The check's in the post. Yeah. Yes, for me, that's a good place to finish. Striking out has 3 meanings. First meaning is setting off. I'm striking out. And so it's actually to leave from my own front door and walk to Santiago, just that whole business of saying, I'm just going to set off. I don't know where I'm sleeping tonight. I'm not even terribly sure where I'm going, but I'm going to put my pack on my back. I'm going to go. Very vulnerable feeling, but hugely liberating. And I would say, it's up there with, getting married, your first child being born, as I would say one of the greatest experiences of my life. But it was that thing about just striking out. This was not a package tour. I just put my pack on my back, I just set off. So that's the first meaning of striking out. The second meaning of striking out is, a more aggressive image of striking out, because I did feel the questions about darkness and pilgrimage, I did feel that I was wrestling with God along the way. So up in the mountains on my own, both trying to write these poems to reflect on what was happening to me, what I was thinking and feeling, but wrestling with God, and sometimes having some difficult times. But the third meaning of striking out is where I discovered that I'm actually taking a red pen. And so part of it was I felt when I walked to Santiago, it was like taking a red pen to my life. And striking out all the things in life which I thought were so important, right down to the third pair of socks, and discovering actually you don't need them. So there, I think we should end.
Perfect ending, thank you.